Peter.
This meeting is being recorded.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 2022 Wilberforce Dialogue, which is an annual event in the university's calendar, but sadly, due to COVID, hasn't actually taken place since 2019. So we're absolutely delighted to have it back, I have to say, this evening. So the Wilberforce Dialogue is held in recognition of Basil Wilberforce, who is the grandson of William, the politician and philanthropist who, as you will be aware, successfully headed parliamentary campaigns leading to the abolition of the slave trade. Now we're going to hear a little bit more, I think, about the Wilberforce family shortly, but just to say that Basil was actually local to Southampton for a time as rector of St Mary's, Southampton, and as an honorary canon of Winchester, he too campaigned throughout his life on matters of justice and equality. So this evening's event is organised by colleagues in our Spirituality and Reflection service alongside our community's development team. Our topic, as you will know, is Can Safe Passage Really Exist? And the event is timed tonight to coincide with National Refugee Week, the theme of which this year is healing and mutual care. And I'm sure you would agree with me that given the social divisions we see on a daily basis, this topic is very, very timely. So we'll shortly introduce this evening's outstanding panelists who will themselves explore the lived experience of those who have secured sanctuary, and will also debate what safe passage for refugees really means. The topic itself is very relevant to the work currently underway at the university as we take our own journey to become a university of sanctuary, a journey in which we as a university are seeking to create a culture of welcome for those seeking sanctuary in the United Kingdom. And I am really proud, I have to say, that the university has recently launched a full fees sanctuary scholarship to support individuals to gain free tuition on an academic programme. So learning and sharing are fundamental principles of the University of Sanctuary movement. And I believe as a society, we have much to learn from those seeking sanctuary about holding on to hope in the face of adversity, and about healing and mutual care. So finally, I would like to thank everyone who has been involved in organising this evening's event, but particularly to thank our expert guests for joining us this evening. And I'm now pleased to hand back to Professor Peter Lloyd, who is Dean of the Faculty of Creative Industries, Architecture and Engineering in the university. He's going to be hosting the event this evening. Firstly, to introduce the panel and then to get us underway. So, Peter, back to you. Thank you.
Many thanks, Professor Stanton. So, we've got three incredible panelists, each with their own individual perspective on the question, can safe passage really exist? Each with their own specific knowledge and one with actual lived experience, which hopefully there'll be an opportunity that individual to share today. I'm going to give an introduction into the Wilberforce family, and more so I'm going to concentrate on providing a little bit of scene setting around that question. But before I do, I'd just like to give the panelists an opportunity to introduce themselves. Angela, can we go to you first, please?
Of course you can. Thank you, Solon, for having me today. Yes, my name's Angela Cohen. I'm second generation Holocaust survivor and I chair the 45A Society. A bit about the society and why it's so important, I feel, that we need to know their stories. In 1945, a group of young Holocaust survivors were brought to the UK from Eastern Europe. Most of them had lost their entire families, murdered by the Nazis in the most evil way imaginable. There was a discussion in Parliament led by the then Prime Minister Clement Attlee, who suggested that the government help bring 1,000 of the survivors to the UK. The Foreign Secretary, Ernest Bevan, didn't think it was the best idea because there would be young men, young soldiers who had fought for their country, and they would be returning home needing jobs, and they should take precedence. Eventually, the Central British Fund, later to become World Jewish Relief, they raised the funds, but they could only find 732 under the age of 18 young children to come to Britain. It was agreed that they would convalesce here and then they would go on to Palestine. Most were boys, but their number did include 180 girls, but they did become known as the boys, and they arrived in 5 groups. The first group of 300 were flown by RAF bombers from Prague to Windermere, and the boys actually thought they'd arrived in paradise. And this is interesting because over 200 in the second group went to Southampton, and the last 3 groups went to Scotland, Ireland, and other places around the UK. After a few years, they were all granted British citizenship. In 1965, a few of the boys got together and they founded the 45 Aid Society. They had 3 clear missions: one, to look after each other; the second, to give back to their adopted country that they had fallen in love with; and 3, to teach the lessons of the Holocaust. The society is now run by the 2nd and 3rd generation. My own family were murdered in Treblinka concentration camp. My dad, Morris, was the eldest child, his mother, Hannah, his dad, Elimelech, his brother, Nathan, and 4 little sisters, Frumka, Perla, Surila, and Miriam, the youngest being 7, were all murdered there. Our boys' story is now used as a vehicle for an amazing education programme. In 2018, I made a TV programme with my son, Rob Rinder, where I visited Treblinka concentration camp, and that gave me an incredible platform to tell the story. The programme was watched by over 7 million. The story of triumph over adversity is a lesson that I hope will help future generations that are looking for safe passage.
Angela, thank you so much. Annie, could I ask you to introduce yourself, please?
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Annie. I am based in Newport, Wales. I am a Voices Ambassador, where we campaign to change hearts, policies, and minds. And then I am a sanctuary city ambassador also, where we are doing our best to recruit people to become sanctuary schools, to be more receptive to asylum seekers and refugees and migrants. I am championing sanctuary schools. That's the lower primary schools, just because I think that that's where we need to change a lot of hearts and minds, but also set them out into the world with the right perspective of what sanctuary people are. I am a Red Cross intern, where we are also looking after the people who are sanctuary seekers and trying our best to make sure that they have good experiences, and also watch out for whatever challenges they come up with. So that's how we campaign to change policies, minds, and hearts. I am a sanctuary seeker currently, so ongoing, and privileged to be in this forum. Thank you.
Annie, thank you so much. And Reverend Steve, could I ask you to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, of course. Thank you ever so much for inviting me to be part of this conversation today. My name is Steve Tinning. I'm a Baptist minister, and I work for the Baptist Union of Great Britain as something called their Public Issues Enabler. which essentially means that I try to help churches up and down the country engage with issues of justice and get involved in political advocacy around poverty and economy and climate change and peacemaking and the character of politics and the welcome of strangers, as we put it in our religious language, which essentially is about asylum seeking and refugees. So I sort of come to this conversation very much from a position of faith, as Basil Wilberforce did and many others from the Wilberforce family. People of faith are learning to speak up very clearly on issues of asylum. You'll have seen the Church of England speaking very clearly about the events around the Rwanda deportation plans recently, and it's essentially, look, I'm a minister. I promise I'm not going to get preachy this evening. Now is not the time for that, but it is a fundamental part of my story. I read the Bible, and it tells me not to forget to show hospitality to strangers, because some who have done that have entertained angels without knowing it. And I'm reminded by the centerpiece of my faith, Jesus, who said, when I was a stranger, you welcomed me. And whenever you did it for the least of these, you did it for me. And so I just believe that a central part of any Christian's working out of their faith is to find ways to show kindness and hospitality to the poorest and the most vulnerable in the world. So that's sort of my basis of where I'm coming to it at. But I'm also a grassroots activist. I'm the chair of a campaigns team for a charity called Safe Passage, who advocate for particularly children and unaccompanied children who are looking to come to the UK. And I trained with Citizens UK to be a community organiser on this issue as well. So that's sort of where I'm coming from on it. But I'm just very grateful to be here, and many congratulations to the university on their pursuit of becoming a university of sanctuary. It's a really important thing to be doing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Steve. Thank you, Angie. Thank you, Annie. Mike, could you put the PowerPoint up, please? So we've met our panelists. But why are we here? Can Safe Passage really exist? Who are the Wilberforce family? What is current research around Safe Passage? What is the current temperature globally or worldwide? Well, next slide, please, Mike. Let's find out who the Wilberforce family are first. So this is Basil. Let's put a name to a face. This is Basil Wilberforce, who was the rector of St. Mary's Church here in Southampton from 1871 to 1894. And it's that connection that brings us here today. He did a lot in his life. The Wilberforce family as a whole did. They certainly weren't slouches. So other achievements for Basil included being made honorary canon of Winchester. And in 1894, he was appointed canon of Westminster Abbey. If you can put the next slide on, Mike. Basil was the youngest son of Samuel Wilberforce, and he was the grandson of, Mike, William Wilberforce. So William Wilberforce, the grandfather, a priest and a minister, a philanthropist, a statesman, and as we've heard from Professor Stanton, an abolitionist. Notably key in supporting and succeeding in the abolition of slavery. I mean, a significant achievement. You've got to concede that. But particularly significant when you look a little bit deeper into it, and you look at the significant and stern opposition that he had to speak up against in order to make that happen. And it wasn't a thing that happened overnight. It was 20 years of lobbying and putting forward bills to get that awful situation abolished. Next slide, please, Mike. Okay, so in general, the family were all keen supporters of social justice, education, religion, reformation. And I suppose you could sum it up, as Steve did, the care of others less fortunate than themselves. A quote from William Wilberforce underpins that sentiment. and I think it's particularly pertinent to our discussion here today. He said, "If it to be feelingly alive to the sufferings of my fellow creatures is to be considered a fanatic, then I am one of the most incurable fanatics ever permitted to be at large." So we've got some beautiful fanatics on our panel this evening. We've already been introduced to them. But before we engage with them, I just wanted to take some time to set the scene. And I did wonder, I mean, the first question that I asked myself, and the question that I would pose of you, the audience, is how familiar are we actually with this issue of forced migration? I mean, it's everywhere at the moment, isn't it? So we can say that we're aware of it, but are we familiar with it? Do we understand it? Next slide, please, Mike. My background is visual art, so I approach everything through the lens of visual culture. And here's a familiar image, and it's one that's very current given the blockbuster films that he's appeared in and his recent visit to our Queen in the palace. It's a familiar, and I'd say it's a really comforting image, you know, a character that we would send our children to sleep with at night even. But it was born from a much more tragic experience that was experienced by Paddington's creator, Michael Bond, that we might not be fully sort of coercent with, that we might not understand or appreciate. In December 1938, Florence Nightingale led the first Kindertransport. So she guided 196 Jewish children from the horrors of Nazi Europe to the United Kingdom. Over the next 9 months, individuals of all faiths would collaborate as part of Kindertransport to save, I don't know, almost 10,000 further children to find refuge in the UK. Michael Bond was on active service at this time, and he witnessed the Kindertransport children arriving at Reading Station, just up the road from where we are today. He said of his experience, they all had a label around their neck with their name and address on, and a little case or package containing all their treasured possessions. So Paddington, in a sense, was a refugee. And I do not think that there's a sadder sight than refugees. So that was Michael Bond in 2017 in a Guardian interview just before his death. Mike, could we have the next slide? So this tells us two things, I would say. Firstly, we need to question our understanding of forced migration. And secondly, I mean, whilst situations in the Ukraine, Syria, and Afghanistan are all current, the need for safe passage isn't new, it's historic. And we can tell from the introductions that Annie and Angie are both very well placed to help us consider both of these questions. Next slide, please. The current national perspective is fraught with contention. However, here are the headline aims of the UK's proposed introduction of the Nationality and Borders Bill. And on the face of it, it looks reasonable. It looks well-meaning. One might say it even looks noble. But if we can look at the next slide, Mike, it's faced considerable opposition and criticism from the highest levels, you know, from a national level. I mean, this is the UN High Commissioner for Refugees talking on the slide there, to our royal family, to political leaders, past and present as well. So particular contention exists around the processing of refugees in Rwanda at the moment, and that's an issue our panel member, the Reverend Steve, has been publicly vocal on, and one that he'll be able to provide us with in terms of specific insight, particularly in relation to issues on justice within the church, public and political life. Okay, so Mike, if we can take down the PowerPoint, I'd now like to go into the sort of discussions, and I'd like to start with a question which I'd like to pose to Steve, I think, just to get the ball rolling. Steve, what does safe passage mean to you?
Well, thank you, Peter, for that introduction. You know, safe passage personally to me doesn't mean nearly as much as it does to those who depend upon it for their survival. You know, we're fortunate here today to hear from people who have first-hand experience of the importance of compassionate asylum and safe routes, and it is critical. I think I first got involved in this in a relatively recent period of time, about 7 years ago, when, for those of you that can remember, the body of 3-year-old Alan Kurdi was plastered all over the front of the British newspapers. This 3-year-old toddler who had tried to reach Europe from Turkey across the Mediterranean and died in the process, along with so many others. But and I still don't really know how I feel about that article or those articles, because it just felt strange seeing this poor lad on the front page of our newspapers. But I couldn't shake it, you know, for days. I was just thinking about this poor lad. At the time I had a 3-year-old myself, and you can't detach yourself from that sort of reality. And within a few days of it, the then Prime Minister, David Cameron, announced a plan to bring 20,000 Syrian refugees to the UK, a safe route that in 5 years was fulfilled. And I had the privilege of befriending a family that were fortunate enough to be able to come to the UK through that route. They have changed my life. They would be very sweet if they were here today to talk about what the UK has done for them. But I can assure you the community that have been blessed by their presence have benefited every bit as much. And I think when you come to know people who have suffered in the way that so many asylum seekers and refugees have, and you get to know them and understand something of their humanity, the question around asylum and refugee care turns from being something that is an easy political ball to be knocked around and to use statistics on, to you talking about the well-being of friends. And I think the quicker that we can give people the experience of recognising the humanity of those that are fleeing war and persecution, those who've been trafficked, those that have been tortured, and just see the humanity in them, you'd soon come to appreciate safe passage and the importance of it the way that I have. At least 44 people died or went missing trying to cross the Channel to the UK last year. 300 in the last 20 years. You said it took 20 years for the laws around slavery to be abolished. Well, in that 20 years, we've seen 300 at least die on our shores. At least 36 of them were children. You know, something's got to be done. Things need to change.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks for getting the ball rolling as well. Panelists, were there any comments that you had around safe passage and what that means to you, or anything Steve might have raised there?
I just say that I think what Steve is saying about the Syrian family is just incredible. You know, I talk about the boys that came over after the war, but it's so amazing that these families have come over. Can I ask you, Steve, are they happy? Have they settled? And are they doing well?
That is an excellent question. If you've got, I'm really sorry to hog the time, but I might just give a few minutes to that, if that's all right. When they arrived, we had sort of made a lot of plans to welcome them in and to take them on bus tours of our town, to show them the ropes. So essentially, they were staying in a flat that was owned by the church that at the time I was the minister of. But quite quickly, we realised that they were not well, that they were not all right. They were grateful to be here, but they'd been separated from their 2 sons. They had a 15-year-old daughter that was allowed to come with them, but they also had a 19-year-old son who was too old. He was considered an independent adult male, so he was left behind in Turkey when they were brought here, and they were separated from him. And their other son, who was 17 when they left Syria, wasn't able to leave the country at the same time as them because he didn't have a passport. So he was waiting for the passport. The borders were still open at that time, and he was just going to catch them up when his passport arrived. But in the time that they left and his passport arriving, the Syrian army turned up to recruit him, and he refused to fight. So they put him in jail and tortured him for 4 years. So when the family arrived here with us, they were separated from their son in Turkey, they were separated from their son in Syria, and that obsessed their minds, as they would for any of you that have got children. You'd understand how the pain of separation would torture you. And so, you know, we were trying to break through some of that, but ultimately it became our ambition to do whatever we could to advocate for their son, particularly the one that was in Syria, and to see him released and to try and get them reunited. And so off started this long campaign with our MP and with the UNHCR and with the Red Cross and many others. And eventually we found a solicitor that would take the case, and they built a case. He was released from prison on the understanding that he'd report to the army, which of course he didn't. He wasn't about to fight for the people that had been torturing him for years. So he jumped away from Syria, crossed into Turkey. Again, this is a very long story condensed into a short amount of time. But eventually, you know, we were able to build a case and through the courts arrange for his safe return. I think we might have a video that we can show of him being reunited with his family in the UK. Is that something we can show?
Steve, we are running just a little bit short on time, so I wonder, Joe, could that link be put in the chat, please, so that the audience can use it and look at it in their own time?
I'm sorry, I don't think it's available on the internet. It's only something we'd be able to show on here, so we'll just have to skip it. But it was that's a shame. Never mind.
Steve, could I ask you a question, please?
Of course you can.
I mean, having experienced a refugee family in your parish and providing them with a home, I mean, the government comes in for a lot of sort of criticism. One of the things that they've organised is this sort of homes for refugees. I mean, how do you feel about that? That idea? That's a good idea, right?
It's a mixed idea. It's good because it provides a safe route from a place of difficulty into a place of welcome. I have mixed feelings about it. I'm trying to welcome it as much as I can, and I'm trying to arrange for as many of the families that come from the churches that I'm involved in to take it on board, but it has to be done as community. The difficulty is it is slightly different to community sponsorship, where a community would gather around and raise the support and awareness to welcome a family. And this is now in the hands of sometimes individuals, but at most a small family who welcome people into their very living. And some people, I think, have perhaps offered that without thinking through the commitment that's involved in that. And so when it happens, sometimes these things are breaking down because it's too much for anybody to cope with, to essentially be the first-hand carers and hospitality providers for people that have gone through extreme trauma. So I am an advocate for Homes for Ukraine, but with some caveats that it is properly supported by the local community of those that are offering the homes that they have.
Thanks, Steve. And Angela, I wonder if I could turn to you, and I wonder if I could ask you the question, you know, given your knowledge and experience, has history influenced our thoughts around safe passage, do you think?
Well, in my case, certainly. You know, when I was a little girl and my dad would have bad dreams and scream in the night, my mother would say, "You've got to remember that all his family were taken away and killed." I think when we talk about refugees, there seems to be three very different issues. You know, assimilation and national patriotism, and, you know, how they're going to manage net economic benefit. The first group of 300 of the boys that arrived in Windermere, that were given sanctuary by a small community that had never met a Jewish person in their lives. And I think, you know, when we can just stop for 1 second and think how welcoming and in Southampton exactly the same. They were welcome, and they really, really did, and I use this word very carefully, they fell in love with their adopted country. And the boys themselves, they became model citizens. They studied, they started business, married, they had families. They never ever took democracy, and this sounds heavy, but I really mean it, and the rule of law for granted. And they very much wanted to give back and assimilate. And in fact, our past president, who now is a very old man called Sir Ben Heathcote, he actually represented Britain in the Olympics in 1956. I do know, and we all know, that safe passage is possible now, and we can see that sanctuary can be achieved. For instance, you know, the Ukrainian refugees who have been so welcomed by Poland and so many other countries in Europe. I just feel, you know, that my job, if you like, is to teach the lessons from history and the alchemy of the wrong man at the right time, and a blink of an eye, the world changes. And, you know, at this moment, am I talking about 1940 or 2022? I looked up safe passage, and it actually said safe passage means that all people should feel safe without the fear of being attacked or arrested. You know, the answer seems so simple, but we all know it's far more complicated. Closed borders, international law, morality. You know, you can feel a library with books and papers that have been written about asylum seekers, refugees. Should they be allowed, or should they be sent back? As second gen and as a chair of the Holocaust charity is good Agnes, because this country opened the door to my dad and the boys and gave them sanctuary.
Thank you, Angela. Tell us a little bit more about the boys. Did you? I mean, there is a film, isn't that that people could watch?
There is.
Might you get that in the chat, please?
There are some wonderful films, and obviously, you know, the film I'd love you to watch would be the Southampton Boys, and I'm hoping next year that all the second gen are going to come to Southampton and go to Winters Hill Hall, where they were given sanctuary, if you like, and just have the most amazing time. The boys are absolutely, how can I say that? The most amazing men and women that I have ever met. And I would love one day, if you're going to do this again, to actually bring on one of the boys. They're all getting quite old now, as you can imagine. But when they talk about and things, you know, there's a wonderful boy, and I'll shut up very quickly after this, but just to give you an idea, called Harry Spiro. Harry's 92 and he's a great-grandfather with a beautiful family, a very beautiful family. And he once said to me, when he was 16, he would look, and in Poland, he would look at a body, a dead body. And I know this is heavy stuff, but just, you know, this is perhaps what with the kind of stuff that we need to understand. He would look at a dead body and he would think, are their shoes better than what I'm wearing? Is their coat warmer than what I've got on? And have they got any food in their pockets? When you reduce humankind to that, perhaps that's why we must learn the lessons of history.
Amen.
Thank you, Angela. What do we think, panel? I mean, quite sobering, isn't it? When you talk about the sort of reality of it. I mean, you know, your example, Steve, and Angela's example, it's sobering, isn't it? But I suppose another thing that Angela's brought to our attention is the fact that it's not just about being human and caring for others less fortunate. There's actually benefit to this, isn't there? You know, by bringing these individuals into the country, they become part of the country. It's not just a case of You know, we've got these people coming in and they're a liability.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Annie, I promise I'll let you talk. I'm going to shut up in a minute, I promise. But I've had the privilege of getting to know Alf Dubs over the last few years, a parliamentarian in the House of Lords, and he was a kinder transport boy. We had 10,000 kids come from Germany and from Eastern Europe to Sanctuary here in the UK, many of them unaccompanied. And now we live in a world in which our government is shutting down safe routes for unaccompanied children to be reunited with their family. We are not learning the lessons of the past, and we have the compassion if we have the desire. Annie, I'm so sorry. I'm going to be quiet. Go for it.
No. As I listen to this, it brings to mind that there is what they call safe routes to this country. One of them is the UK resettlement scheme. There is the community sponsorship, which Peter was speaking about, and there is Afghan citizen resettlement scheme. And I think now there's a fourth one, the Ukraine resettlement scheme. And this makes you realize that there is some goodwill out there for resettling people, or recognizing that there are refugees out there, there are people who are migrants out there, there are people who are asylum seekers out there. But it is diluted as it goes down to implementation. It is spoken of, and spoken of very well. There are documents upon documents which there's been research, there is reports which have been written, and there is this once in a while tokenism that comes into play, where there is one person or 10 people who actually go through these systems. But what you're not told is the hoops they have to jump and what becomes of them. I keep saying it is, when people talk about refugees or migrants, do you see the value of them, or do you see them as a drain of resource? And there's this narrative out there that is about the draining of resource, but it's never truly broken down for you to understand what it means. It sounds very good. It sounds very good. Oh, they drain the resource, but they don't turn around and tell you this is the value that they bring into the environment that they occupy when they are left to thrive in the communities that they go and assimilate into. So I think safe passage is really a good idea, but we need to understand what it actually means. We need to own it, not just speak, but actually work that system. And you can see the gaps, because I think it is not new. This has been there's a history of migration. There's a history of migration there. So there are lessons already which are in place, which people have learned. But are they really implementing them now, or are they reinventing? And I think that is maybe the challenge that we are having. So I just wanted to add that to that conversation.
Well, Annie, I mean, yeah, I know. Well, I'm going to go straight back to you, Annie. I mean, with that in mind, I mean, we're talking about safe passage. This is lived experience for you. So, drawing on your lived experience, how far away would you say we are from safe passage?
I think, and this might sound naive that there is hope of safe passage. There is lessons which we can take from history. There is hope that people can stop seeing it as a one-way street. But also the hope that I have is that we are able to have these conversations, this kind of conversations, whereby I think maybe not too long ago, we were not having these conversations. And in having these conversations, we're changing the narrative. And in changing the narrative, that means we are beginning to see the issues that are there. So in seeing the issues, that means somebody is going to come up with a solution that is actually meaningful. And one of the ways I've noticed is that there is more openness to people with lived experience like me to come speak into the experiences we go through. And I think that is something that was not there before, where people with lived experience were not valued. So with people with lived experience, so you had people talking about me who did not understand me and my process and the process I've gone through, because there's not two processes which are the same as an asylum seeker or as a refugee. So for me to be able to speak into the solution, I think we are going to get change. So there is hope for a safe passage, but it needs for more lived experience people speaking for themselves, not people speaking for them, because they know the problems and the issues that they are going through this system. Again, it's like anything else. It's like having a child. You can when you're pregnant, you can say, oh, you're not being a very good mother, oh, da da da, until you become a mother. And you realize you can actually have an all-nighter where you did not sleep a wink. So as a mother, you now have perspective. Yeah. As a pregnant person, you are pregnant, yes, you are a mother, yes, you're going to be a mother, but you don't truly internalize, you have not really internalized that process of bringing up a child. So the same thing, there's very many well-meaning people trying to be part of this conversation, but they cannot speak better than the person who's lived it. So I think with this exposure, we are going, there's hope. So I'm going to say there is hope. As much as I have a lot of challenges with it, I know that there is hope. That's all I can say about that, I think, at this moment. Back to you,
thanks,
Peter.
Annie. Yeah, thanks, Annie. That's a mega positive answer. I mean, even with the things that are happening now, you feel that we're at a sort of a ground zero type situation where things can only get better. Is that your stance? Yeah. Yes.
I think we need to be at ground zero for there to be movement. I think they need to be what we're seeing is not new. The way the hostility, it's not new, it's been there. But even after that whole hostility, people kind of went back to status quo, to what they were doing, and they've perfected to some way to how to be a hostile environment. But the fact that people are now standing up means that we are at that point where somebody can say, okay, this so far we've done this, can we do it this other way? Because it's like, I keep saying, it's like we are at that point where, lack of a better, maybe, it's like our Berlin Wall. We are breaking it down. It's breaking, it's not completely broken, it's broken. So when we say it's a broken asylum process, that's like saying that big wall is coming down. So can we rebuild it, and how are we going to rebuild it?
Again, mega positive, Annie. Can you believe we've spoken for 35, almost 40 minutes? It feels like about 5 minutes, doesn't it? I'm going to ask a closing question, and I'm going to pose this question to each of the panelists. Angela, I'm going to come to you first.
Angie's good.
Yeah, Angie, okay, thank you. We're getting to know each other better now, yeah. So we've discussed a lot this evening. We're operating in an environment that's challenging financially, it's challenging politically, socially, it's challenging. And here's a big sort of broad question for you. If there was just one thing that you could change now in the system, what would that change be? And Angie, let's go to you first.
Okay, well, I think, and slightly going off in a different direction, for me, it very much would be social media. There's various things. There was a study done not that long ago where it was proved that if, I can't think of the right word, but it was proved that if 15-year-old kids see something funny on social media, they will post it. And you're talking to somebody that's a complete dinosaur with things like this. But the idea that I can hide behind and without using my name, that frightens me, because I just feel it is so out of control. And I'm sure other people come back and tell me all the good stuff about it. And I'm sure there is a lot of good stuff. But for me, the thing that frightens me so much is social media. And obviously things like Holocaust denial, which is, something that I talk about and think about all the time. It's part of my DNA, if you like. When I see that on social media, I feel weak, which is not a way. I feel that I don't know what to do. I lose strength because I've got nobody to talk to. It's faceless. So perhaps social media is my bête noire at this moment, very much so. And perhaps if it can be used for good, it is an incredible platform, but it's not good enough at the moment.
Wow, that did come in from the left field, Angela, but that's a really great one. Thank you. Okay, Annie, could I ask you the same question thing? What would be that one thing that you would change?
You are asking in respect to the asylum system?
Yeah.
I would want the word asylum system abolished and the word hostile environment abolished. I don't know if that's possible. Why? If you look at the meaning of asylum, it is, I guess, what everybody is in the system is doing to the people who are seeking asylum. When you look at the word hostile environment, where does it stop? Where does hostility start and where does it stop? It's you're given a blank canvas to be as nasty as you can be. And somebody thought that that's a good way to go about things, that you can give. It's like giving a child a gun and saying, oh, but it's a gun, but they're just gonna hold it. And you not going on and saying, by the way, there is a safety net for this, there is this, there is that, this is how you should use only when only this happens, you should, without any perimeters. That is insane on its own. To be able to give people a word as hostile environment is really, really, really a Pandora's box that people will the depravities of people. The Bible says, and I'm not preaching, it says the heart of a man is desperately wicked. And it does not tell you how wicked, but it tells you that it can be desperately wicked. So are we in shock when we see some of the things that people are coming up with as to justify hostile environment? Are we really shocked? It's somebody using that word and standing by it and saying, but this is what people want. People want a hostile environment for the people coming into this country this is part of hostility. So it's open to translation to different people. And that's scary.
Good point, Annie. And a scary image, the child with the gun, but not an unfamiliar image. Thanks, Annie. Steve, can I go to you finally and ask you the same question? I know it's a broad one, but what's that one thing? What's the headline?
No, I have a very specific one. Well, a very specific two, but they are related, and it's about children. We need, if I had the magic wand, I would open up safe routes. We can't have safe passage without safe routes. And so we need laws that would open up safe routes for unaccompanied children, both those who have no family here and would be dependent upon the compassion of foster carers and adopters, but also for those that want to be reunited with their family. Because we had those routes. One was called the Dub Scheme. It saw about 400 children come to the UK and it was shut down. Before we left the EU, unaccompanied asylum-seeking children could come to the UK to be reunited with their parents, their adult siblings, their grandparents, their aunts and uncles. But the other side of coming out of the EU, we've lost that benefit of the European legislation, and we've reverted to UK law that sees unaccompanied children reunited with their parents if they can manage it, and some other minute exceptional circumstances. But there are children who have no family with them, who are escaping war and persecution, who have family here in the UK, and our government will not let them be reunited. So if I want something changed, I want kids to be looked after. Thurgood Marshall was a lawyer in America. He was a justice on the Supreme Court, and he said, the measure of a country's greatness is its ability to retain compassion in a time of crisis. We are in a time of crisis, both following Brexit, both following the recession and, the pandemic, and now as we enter a time of extreme challenges with the cost of living. But if we cannot retain compassion to kids who are on their own fleeing war and persecution, then how can we call ourselves Great Britain? We are not great. We have to be able to find that voice of compassion and speak it loudly to those making these policies.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you all panel members, really, really powerful. Before we finish this dialogue and move on to the chat questions, Mike, would it be possible, we've just got a minute there, would it be possible to go back to Reverend Steve's film about the family reunion film?
Oh, thank you. We've got time, that would be great.
Steve, do you want to give a quick narrative before?
Yeah, just
to find the play button.
Yeah, mum and dad and 15-year-old daughter were brought to the UK. Their sons weren't. And after 4 years of campaigning, we eventually managed to see a son who had been tortured for 4 years and was only 17 years old when they left Syria, eventually be allowed safe passage to the UK. And I wanted you to see this video because it speaks to the humanity of what we're talking about. All three of us panelists have talked about the importance of contact and community with those who have got lived experience. I'm sure many of you have that, but if you don't, hopefully this 1-minute video will be a demonstration of the importance of listening to those with this lived experience.
I'm really sorry. Mike's actually frozen on his, and he's the host, so we're not actually able to currently put that in the chat to be able to play. I'm really sorry.
It's not in the chat, but if I might be able to share it if that's possible.
If you possibly could say, if you could say that.
Yeah, let me try.
That'd be great. Thank you very much.
Oh, hang on. Sorry.
That's it, Steve. Yeah, that's playing.
I'll try again. Sorry, hang on. Okay.
Oh. Oh.
Okay, thank you, Steve.
That was his brother he'd never met before, born in the UK and eventually reunited with his family. He is living now in the UK and he's doing great. But that's the importance of what we're talking about. Thank you for letting me show that.
Well, what an amazing thing to share.
Yeah.
Okay, let's take some questions from the chat. So Mike's not available. Kevin Rogers, would it be possible for you to pull some questions out of the chat for our panelists to consider?
Certainly, thank you. Yes, Pete, there's been some really interesting questions which have come through. There's one comment about the importance of education here, and I wondered, and maybe Angela, I know your 45 Aid Society really focus on education and the importance of education as we work through that. Are there any reflections on that from your point of view?
Yes, I mean, to me, that's key. You know, with listening to Annie and Steve, I think we're totally on exactly the same page. You know, education and dialogue is the only way we're going to move forward with any of this. At the moment, and what's interesting, at the moment, I'm working on a project with 70 schools. And of course, the story is not just about education as a history lesson, but it's part of citizenship, it's part of social science. It can relate to so many things, bullying, racism, so many things it can relate to. And that's, for me, is why education is key.
Thank you. And a different question relating to...
Can I answer to that just before you move on?
Yeah, go for it, Annie, please.
The statistics currently show that 75% of migrants, asylum seekers, refugees, when they are granted their status, 75% of them remain at entry-level positions. Think about that. 75% of them remain at entry-level positions. Why are they at entry-level positions? It's because they probably have not gotten education for them to be able to assimilate into the communities that they're living in. So people talk a lot about all the other kinds of assimilations, but they forget that education is the one common denominator that everybody is judged on when they're looking for jobs. It is not because I have a resume. I could have a resume. When I go to the community, to the employment center, they'll do for me a resume. But the resume is not what is going to get me into those jobs. People are looking for me to have learned my language. Apart from language, they're looking at me to have had education that is at par for the jobs that I'm looking for. Remember, the schools, the places that a lot of these migrants come from, a lot of their credentials are not valid when they come here. They have to redo, they have to retake school for them to be at par with another person. So when they are, and it's, the reason why they're not doing the education is, first of all, the way the system is set up. You have a 10-year route, and after every 3 years, you're probably paying £3,000 to renew your status in the country. So are you going to work? Are you going to go to school so that you can save up for that money? Because you cannot be late to apply for your status. So people are choosing to work so that they can save up $3,000 to be able to stay in the country that they had waited maybe another 10 years. But they cannot go to school because it's one of the things. You're not allowed to go to school. You're not allowed to go to school. You're not allowed to go to work. When your child gets to, if you have a child and they get to 16 years old, they cannot go to university. So their schooling is curtailed from there. So here you have a lot of migrants who are not getting into other roles. Yes, there are few who are ambitious who manage to do it. I'm not saying that they're not there. There are few of them. But 75% is a really big number, and it's all about education.
And education possibly for us as listeners to this, and maybe this Refugee Week, where we recognise Refugee Week, is a real opportunity for us to educate and learn for ourselves. Can I, Pete? There's another interesting question in the chat, and we've picked up about where safe routes have been opened, or purportedly safe routes opened, and we've heard about Syria, Afghanistan, of course, and more recently Ukraine. The example is given of Sri Lanka, where things are really difficult in Sri Lanka.
Oh, I've lost Kevin.
Yeah, he's frozen.
Can I finish off his question? Because he was just coming, I've just seen it, it's from Himia, and she's asking what can be done to open safe passage to different countries, like Sri Lanka. And I don't know if, is that all right? Oh, we've got you back, Kevin. I just finished off your question. Essentially, we have to organise, because at the moment, if you're not from Ukraine or from Afghanistan or from or to some extent from Syria, although far less easy now, the options for you coming to the UK through safe passage are becoming much more limited. Annie mentioned earlier that there are a handful of safe routes. The UK resettlement scheme is an important one, but there are no limits, there are no targets set by the government on it. So it's entirely dependent on government spending and the capacity of overly stretched local councils to be able to determine how many come, so that we can't hold them to account on this stuff. Or at least when David Cameron said he'd bring in 20,000 in 5 years, we could hold him to account on that. So we have to organise in order to ensure that the government set targets for these broader schemes that can include countries like Sri Lanka. We need to get involved in community sponsorship, because that can be resourced from any country, although it is administrated through the UNHCR, so they will determine who the most vulnerable and the most in need are. We can't necessarily guarantee which countries they'll be. But if I'm honest with you, the most important thing you can do is in the build up to the next general election. And I'm not trying to get party political here at all, but the government are only doing what the government are doing now because they made promises in the manifesto leading up to the last election that they are now fulfilling. So if you want to see a different kind of legislation around migration and asylum seeking and refugees, then you need to be lobbying all the parties to ensure that they put in their manifesto something that is compassionate and worldwide and reaches those in most need, and that our country is at least playing its part, its fair part, in the international cooperation of helping those in most need. Because if it's not in that manifesto when the general election comes, then they will use excuses not to implement it in their term, whichever party it is. So that's what I would say.
Steve, thank you very, very much. I'll just finish, if I may, just with a comment from somebody in the chat, and then I'll pass back to Pete to wrap things up. But somebody's written that as a maritime lawyer and lecturer, I naturally see safe passage through the prism of those trying to cross the channel. Our obligations as a state under the International Convention on Maritime Search and Rescue in relation to anyone who needs assistance in whatever craft they are in, whatever their nationality, is clear. The strong reaction of the majority to the Home Secretary's plan to push boats back to France and the huge increase in support, including financial, for the RNLI after they were unjustly criticised for rescuing those in danger in the Channel, show the true character of our nation. We are still the nation who welcomed the kinder transport. We must not let the divisive few, whom for political purposes dominates the debate. We have been enriched as a society by those who have chosen to make the UK their home.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Bravo.
Pete,
Well said.
Excellent. Yeah.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you for that interlude. There is one other question there that I'd like to open up to the panel. It's more of a practical question, really. It's aimed at Steve, but I wonder whether Annie or Angela might be able to answer it. So Natalia is saying that there's a household that wants to take refugees. They've provided everything, they've proven that they can provide everything for them, but they've been stopped by immigration. What can they do now? Now, without knowing the details of that case, I guess what Natalia is asking, is there an appeal process, or what can somebody do that thinks they've got everything that a refugee would require in terms of support, but is nevertheless being stopped by immigration? Yeah. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's a disgrace, but that doesn't help anything.
I mean, it does. There are a million reasons why that may have happened, and that's why this question is so difficult. But anybody that wants to offer their home to Ukrainian refugees have to have visits from their local council to prove that their housing is suitable and appropriate. Rightly so, in my opinion. The last thing you need is people taking advantage of these schemes in order to exploit the refugees that would want to be able to come. And I'm not for a minute suggesting that Natalia's friends are in that camp, but that is why some of the scrutiny around this is so strict. And there'll be similar things from the other end in terms of Interpol checks that may have scuppered things at their end. Without knowing the reasons, it's difficult to know, but I would absolutely get in touch with your MP, again, whichever party they're from, and ask them to investigate why this has happened and try to get some more information around it. Your MP is your ticket into the places that make these decisions. So lobby and meet with your MP in their surgeries. My MP was David Amis, who you know, tragically was killed last year, but through long advocacy with that family that I showed you earlier and his help in getting them reunited, he signed bills against his own party to try and bring more asylum-seeking children into the UK against his party. And so building good relationship with your MP for specific reason or for broader campaigning reason can really make all the difference.
Yeah, and I think without revealing your political affiliations too much, Steve, it's safe to say that relationship, you know, we've got interfaith, that relationship was a real inter-party relationship, wasn't it? I mean, yeah. He was a staunch conservative, and he turned against. Yeah,
he was a staunch conservative. He told me that he could count on one hand the number of times he'd voted against his party, and he'd been in charge he'd been the MP for Southend West for decades. But he did listen. and tragically there are some MPs that will block you from Twitter if you air something that you disagree with them. But with David, it didn't matter what it was. If you were a constituent, his door would always be open to listen, even if he disagreed with you. And I'll always be forever grateful for that. He was a man of deep integrity. And as I say, when the rubber hit the road, he did stand up in Parliament and make the case that we were trying to make. So a deep loss indeed. There are good MPs in every party. There are good MPs in every party. Yeah.
Well, let's think of David tonight. Let's think of all those people, past and present, that have been affected. Before we finish, Annie, did you have something to say, or
I was just going to agree with Steve that we have to be able to change the narrative again about with our MPs, because there is that manifesto which is going to be written, and they are going to use that as their guidance. And I think we need to stand up and speak about what we want, because they speak for us, but we are the ones who feed them to what we want. So somebody said to us as we went for one of the campaigns in Parliament, they say to us, you have to be able to speak to your MP at his level, as his constituent, and you have to share what it is that you want him, what is important to you. And if this is the conversation we want them to take to Parliament, then we need to be able to find them and speak to them so that they know that this is important to us. Again, this comes back to what is our role. The role is not just the role of the MP. They're doing what they think you want. And in the absence of what they think you want, then they're going to make up something, because they need to say something. So why are you not being in that conversation? Why are they not speaking for you? So we need to recruit more people to say that it's okay to have people who are different from you. It's okay for us to not to have this narrative that there is a good refugee versus a bad refugee. There's a safe passage versus unsafe passage. When you say there's a safe passage versus an unsafe passage, you're talking to somebody who's weighed their options and has concluded that this is the only way they can get to where they're going. And they have weighed out the options, but that is the only option they have. If there was a safe passage somewhere that they knew about, wouldn't they use it? They would use it. So for the narrative to become that now we have safe passages and unsafe passages, who decides?
Yeah.
If a house is burning and I jumped through the window, are you going to tell me, Annie, and I broke my legs? Are you going to say to me, Annie, why did you jump through the windows? Don't you think that it was safer for you to go through the door? Because there is a door.
Yeah. Oh, Annie,
so
that's brilliant.
When you start telling to us that there is a safe passage, but the safe passage is this particular way, you're pushing this particular way, but you're not stopping to think, why am I making this crazy decision to get in a dinghy, an inflatable boat, which can burst, can be, I don't know, can be whatever it is, can be blown off. I mean, it doesn't have sails that you're going to navigate it to where you want it to go. You're hoping that the person translated the wave is going to end somewhere safe, and it's going to be in the UK. So if there were safe passages, I'll speak about me. Until I got to this country, I didn't know what being an asylum seeker was. Was I in danger? Yes, I was in danger. Did I know what was a safe passage? If I knew there was one, I would have used it. But here I am, you're now getting categorized that, you know, this is a good refugee, this is not a good refugee. How do you decide what my fear factor is, what motivates me, what motivated me to be able to get into whatever means of transport or means of getting into this country? I was driven by something, and that something is freedom, that something is safety. So stop to think, why is it that these people are doing the things that they're doing?
Yeah.
There is a system. Sorry, there's a system to the madness.
Yeah.
Just because you don't understand what my madness is, does not make it wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much for that. Just very briefly, like what, 2 seconds. The Archbishop of Canterbury in the campaign around the Nationality and Borders Bill said one of the most morally questionable things we can do in any context is to punish people who are already victims. And what Annie has said is these people are doing it because of desperation. If the safe passages were open to them, they would use those safe passages, but they are not. And out of desperation, because they are victims, they come to the UK seeking our help. And what do? We punish them by criminalising them or deporting them to other countries, absconding our responsibility for asylum. It's an utter disgrace. And Annie, I'm so grateful that you're here, and Angela, to be able to share that important voice of those with lived experiences. Look up the Voices networks, look up Migrants Organised. These are organisations that are trying to elevate and give voice to those who have lived experience of this, and nothing can be more important than that.
I echo
our legacy. Yeah. Yes. That's our legacy, to do that. We must do it, absolutely.
Yeah.
Annie, Angela, Steve, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
And for sharing your knowledge and for sharing your experience, and particularly for sharing your precious time with us. I'd like to personally thank Professor Karen Stanton, our Vice-Chancellor, for actively encouraging this dialogue to take place, to our external relations team, and to Kevin Rogers, Director of the Law School, for supporting the dialogue, for providing the support to get this thing up and running. Have I enjoyed this dialogue? I don't think I have. You know, I think enjoyed is the wrong word. Has it been important? Has it left an impression on me? Absolutely. I mean, it's at this point that as chair, I pull together the thoughts that have, you know, been raised, and I sort of bring an end to the dialogue. But in a way, I can't, and I shouldn't. You know, I shouldn't bring an end to this dialogue. It's obviously ongoing. And the other thing that's strange about this dialogue is we're all in agreement. There aren't sort of two sides to negate against one another. But what we have done, we've sort of looked more closely. You know, we've become more aware of this situation. So I'd like to thank the audience for coming along and for supporting this dialogue. And I'd like to finish with, as I started really, with another quote from William Wilberforce. He said, "You may choose to look the other way, but you can never again say that you did not know." Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
God bless wherever you're going. And let's make a change. You know, with this new knowledge that we've got, let's make a change. Thank you, everybody, and good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Good job, everybody. We're still recording, so nobody swear.
I've got a story to tell you about that in a minute.
Joe, are we able to stop the recording?
I think it's Mike who has. Let me see.
Okay. Well, Steve and Annie, thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. You've unmuted me. Thank you. So Angela's gone, but I just wanted to say, Annie, Steve, pretty much as Pete said, really, you can't say we enjoyed the event, but it was massively powerful. It really was. You know, Steve, I was really moved. I was in tears with the video. Good job I had the camera off, I have to say. And you know, Pete let it go on longer than it was scheduled, and I really appreciate you kind of continuing with that, because I think it did feel like we'd only just started the conversation, didn't it? It really did.
Yeah.
A massive thank you, Annie, Steve, from me for
that's very kind. Thank you.
Just, you know, sharing what you have this evening with us. It's just enormously powerful. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you for the invitation. It means so much to me, and to be able to speak about this, I could have done it all night. So I too am grateful that we went on a bit longer, especially because I was very conscious after about 20 minutes I was talking far too much. So I'm sorry, Annie. That was not my intention at all. But I hope you felt you found the platform eventually.
So thank you very much, everyone. Anyway. Mike, Joanne, Kevin, thank you as well for supporting it, and Daniel as well. I can see you there. Thank you.
Brilliant.
Thank you, Karen.
Bye.
So I think, yeah, I think we've had a few problems with Mike as the host. Got a little bit, his computer got frozen. I don't know how to unmute you. It won't let me. Oh,
No, I think I did that.
Oh, bless you. Hopefully it hasn't spoiled the recording. Is that on your computer?
Oh, hang on.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, I've just stopped recording, I think.
I don't
And make sure you edit it. We need to get rid of the edit.
No.
I think I've asked you to do something. There you are. Remembering all my old.
Yeah, it was.
Thank you, everybody.
I know we had really good attendance, so we got up to about 37, and we kept 26 right to the very end. So obviously very engaged in the chat and everything. So yeah, from an attendance point of view, that was really great. So obviously we're really engrossed in everything you were talking about. I was as well. So I was kind of like, oh, I've actually got to do the chat. What's going on?
I missed Pete's message to me saying, Kevin, can you do the questions as Mike is ours to combat? And I was so engrossed and so sort of listening to everybody, I completely missed Pete's message. And so he said, right, we'll go to Kevin for the questions then.
Well, you did very well.
So we'll pad it out for a second while I find the questions.